Welcome to a journey back through history. Today, we witness the moment when the unbreakable walls of Constantinople met the age of cannon, where an emperor named Constantine fought to his last breath, and a 21-year-old Sultan, Mehmed II, decided the fate of an empire. Are you ready? Let's begin the story of May 29, 1453, the day the world changed forever. In the spring of 1453, the ancient city of Constantinople, New Rome, stood like a weathered crown at the edge of two worlds. Once the brightest star of the Eastern Roman, Byzantine Empire, it was now a city of perhaps 50 to 100,000 souls, defended by fewer than 10,000 soldiers and volunteers behind the famous Theodosian Walls. Those walls had turned back sieges for 1,000 years. They were legend, triple lines of stone and ditch that had defeated Huns, Avars, Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, and even the great armies of earlier centuries. But a new power had risen, the Ottoman Empire, led by a 21-year-old sultan with an iron will, Mehmed II. He was brilliant, disciplined, and obsessed with a single idea: to finish what earlier sultans could not. To take the city that controlled the Bosphorus, the gate between Europe and Asia. To claim the Roman legacy for himself. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos wore a crown heavy with history and debt. He had inherited a capital without an empire, a name without an army, a faith divided by politics. To win Western help, he had proclaimed church union with Rome in 1452, but the city's clergy and people were split. Some accepted, many did not. The emperor lacked men, money, and time, but not courage. Two men, two destinies. The Sultan building a future, the emperor defending a civilization. Between them lay stone, faith, and gunpowder. At sea, the Byzantines stretched a massive chain across the mouth of the Golden Horn, the sheltered harbor that had saved them in earlier sieges. On land, the defenders placed their best men at the gate of St. Romanos, the most vulnerable sector facing the Ottoman camp. Among them stood a Genoese professional soldier, Giovanni Giustiniani, whose disciplined troops and siege expertise would become the backbone of the defense. Beyond the walls, a different kind of legend was forming: giant bombards, cast by a Hungarian engineer named Orban. These were monster cannons, capable of hurling stone balls the size of barrels. In an age where walls had always beaten ladders and rams, the age of gunpowder was about to change the rules. On the 6th of April 1453, the Ottoman banners appeared in a vast crescent around the land walls and at the edge of the sea. Drums sounded. Prayers rose from both camps. And the city that had survived 1,000 years of storms faced one last thundercloud. Mehmed II had prepared with cold precision. The previous year he raised Rumeli Hisar, a fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, to choke off aid from the Black Sea and assert control of the strait. He gathered tens of thousands of soldiers, janissaries, his elite infantry, Anatolian and Rumelian levies, cavalry, sappers, and a fleet of more than 100 ships, war galleys, transports, and lighter craft. He hired Orban, paying richly to cast bombards that no Christian prince had matched. The largest gun, the Basilica, as later writers called it, could take hundreds of men and oxen to move and hours to reload, but when it spoke, stone shattered. Inside the city, Constantine XI scraped together Byzantine regulars, townsmen, monks, and foreign volunteers, Genoese, Venetians, and other Latin sailors. Total defenders, around 7,000 to 8,000, perhaps with a few thousand more armed citizens on rotation. Giustiniani took charge of the most threatened land sector. The Venetians and Genoese manned the walls along the Golden Horn, protected by the Great Chain. Diplomacy had failed. Western aid was promised on parchment but moved slowly by sea and politics. A small relief force was somewhere in the Aegean. Inside the city, processions wound beneath broken mosaics and fading frescoes. Hagia Sophia, the great church of Justinian, glowed like a reliquary in a time of famine. Mehmed began by digging in. Earthworks rose. Gun platforms went up facing the gate of St. Romanos. The bombards were dragged into place, bedded in timber and earth to absorb recoil. The Sultan distributed his commanders, Zaganos, Halil, Karatsa, Ishak, and more, across land and sea. Drums rolled. The first shots thundered. The stones smashed against ancient stone. Men on the walls cheered when the walls held. The Ottomans smiled when mortar cracked. Each day, the guns spoke. Each night, the Byzantines repaired, hauling rubble, resetting bricks, packing fascines and earth into gaps, raising palisades behind the scarred fronts. Giustiniani directed the work with a mason's eye and a soldier's urgency. On calm evenings, you could hear hammers from the walls and prayers from the camp. At sea, the Ottoman fleet tested the chain. Firepots arced through the night. Galley oars beat the water as scouts probed the harbor mouth. The defenders watched, waited, and held their breath for the next blow. The siege settled into hard habits. The great bombards smashed at the same sectors day after day, chewing the wall at St. Romanos and nearby towers. Smaller batteries harassed the Blachany and Cherizius gates. Sappers tunneled under the outer ditch, planting charges to collapse foundations. Byzantine miners, guided by a seasoned engineer often identified as Johannes Grant, dug counter-tunnels, listening through bowls placed on the earth to feel the scrape of enemy picks. Some nights, underground chambers exploded, timbers snapped, and men died in darkness without seeing the enemy's face. Ottoman infantry and azaps, irregulars, launched probing assaults, ladders scratching at stone, drums urging courage. The Janissaries, disciplined, terrifying, were held back for decisive moments. Twice the Ottomans pressed the outer wall only to be thrown back by Greek firepots, arrows, and the brutal crossfire of defenders. On the water, skirmishes flared around the Sea of Marmara side and the Bosporus approaches. The Ottoman fleet tried to disrupt any approach by Christian ships. The chain at the Golden Horn held, thick iron links anchored to towers and the Genoese colony across at Galata deterred direct entry. Inside the city, food tightened, hope did not. Priests carried icons along the walls. Constantine XI appeared where the stones were weakest, proving by presence what he lacked in numbers. Giustiniani became a legend among soldiers, patching breaks, leading sorties, even dragging light guns up onto platforms to counter-battery the Ottoman pieces. Mehmed's temper ran cold. He rotated crews, increased the rate of fire, and shifted smaller guns to widen damage. He also knew morale mattered. Each time a flag rose on a cracked tower, he raised his own standards closer. The psychological siege ran alongside the physical one. Then came a day that lifted Christian spirits and stung Ottoman pride, the naval clash of the 20th of April, a spark that would push Mehmed to a desperate, brilliant maneuver. On the 20th of April 1453, 4 Christian ships, 3 Genoese grain vessels and a Byzantine transport, appeared off the Sea of Marmara, sails fat with a favorable wind. The Ottoman fleet swarmed to intercept. Boltaulu, the admiral, tried to ram and board. But the big Christian ships sat high and heavy in the water. Their freeboard, the height from waterline to deck, made them hard to storm. Crossbows and bombards on deck spat back at the attackers. The wind and current favored the Christians, their helmsmen clawed toward the Golden Horn. From the walls, Constantine and the people cheered until they were hoarse. From the Ottoman camp, Mehmed watched in fury as the 4 ships forced their way to the chain, where the defenders winched it down just enough for the ships to slide into the harbor, to safety, to thunderous joy. The Sultan exploded. He punished the admiral, demoting and scourging him. But more importantly, he learned. If he could not break into the Golden Horn, perhaps he could go around it. What followed was audacious. Under the guidance of Zaganos Pasha, and likely inspired by older precedents, Mehmed ordered dozens of light ships dragged overland from the Bosphorus into the Golden Horn. Work crews greased timbers with tallow and oil, laid wooden tracks, and at night, under the cover of drums and cheers, hauled the vessels across the hillside behind Galata. On the 22nd of April, Constantinople woke to a sight that seemed like sorcery, Ottoman ships afloat inside the Golden Horn behind the chain. Panic rippled along the northern walls. The defenders now faced a 2-front siege, land batteries and assaults on the Theodosian Walls, and naval pressure along the Golden Horn. The Ottomans began assembling floating bridges and batteries to bring guns closer to the harbor walls. The city tried fireships, sending burning vessels to break the new flotilla, but shifting winds and Ottoman readiness blunted the attack. With the Golden Horn compromised, Giustiniani had to thin his land defense to man the northern walls. Exactly as Mehmed intended. The Sultan's reputation for madness became reputation for genius. The ring tightened. The city grew smaller every day. With the Golden Horn penetrated, Mehmed intensified everything. Batteries thundered by day, sapping and mining continued by night. The Great Bombard pounded the sector of St. Romanos until the wall slumped like wet clay. Defenders stacked barrels of earth, drove stakes, and raised inner palisades. The fight became a battle of layers: stone, earth, flesh. On the 7th of May and again on the 12th of May, the Ottomans launched major assaults. Waves of irregulars tested ladders and fascines, then better troops pressed in, and at last Janissaries tried to pry open the breach. The defenders fought like cornered lions. Greek firepots, stones, arrows, bolts, and point-blank guns crashed into the compact Ottoman columns. Twice the attackers gained the outer wall only to be driven out in savage counterattacks led by Giustiniani and the emperor himself moving along the line. Beneath their feet, mines went off like earthquakes. One Ottoman gallery was flooded by Byzantine counter-mining, another collapsed under countercharges. Men drowned in dirt. The defenders could not win the trench war, but they could bleed it. Morale seesawed. In the Ottoman camp, the ulama preached victory and paradise. In the city, a solemn procession on the 28th of May carried sacred icons through Hagia Sophia and along the battered walls. Latin and Greek prayed together under candlelight, unity at the edge of extinction. Meanwhile, Mehmed sent envoys more than once, offering honorable terms if the city surrendered now. Constantine answered with dignity: he could not give away what was not his alone. He would die as a basileus or live as one. By late May, the Sultan decided on a final, all-out assault. He moved guns closer, filled ditches with fascines, and positioned 3 waves of troops, irregulars first, then provincial troops, and finally the Janissaries. The fleet in the Golden Horn readied to press the harbour walls while land assaults hit the breaches. The night of 28-29 May would be decisive. On the evening of the 28th of May, Constantinople glowed with candles. In Hagia Sophia, Greeks and Latins received communion together, some for the first time. The emperor asked forgiveness of those he had wronged, men embraced, wept, and returned to their posts. The city's bells rang and fell silent. Many believed a miracle might still come. In the Ottoman camp, torches lined the earthworks. Drums and horns set a heartbeat for an army. Mehmed rode the lines, promising rewards, reminding men of glory and faith, warning that the first through the breach would be ennobled, and the last would be trampled. Muezzins called the night prayer. Silence settled like dew. Shortly after 1 a.m., the Sultan loosed the first wave. Azabs and irregulars swarmed the battered sectors, ladders scraping at stone. Their job was to die expensively, to tire the defenders, reveal the strong points, and fill the ditch with bodies and fascines. For 2 hours, the walls flickered with torchlight and screams. The defenders held. Around 3 a.m., the second wave, better trained Anatolian troops, pressed in, heavier shields before them. They tested the palisades behind the breach at St. Romanos and probed the Blachany sector where the city's defenses were more complex but less massive. Again the defenders bent but did not break. Mehmed waited. He ordered the fleet to press in the Golden Horn, sending grapnels and scaling attempts onto the harbour walls to split the defenders' attention. Arrows arced both ways over dark water. Just before dawn, with smoke hanging in the gullies and adrenaline burning out, the Sultan raised his hand. The Janissaries advanced. They came silently, shields up, match cords glowing for their handguns, ranks like iron. They moved on the main breach at St. Romanos where Giustiniani and Constantine kept watch. The Janissary assault hit like a hammer. The palisades shook, the inner ditch churned with bodies and mud. Giustiniani, fighting among his men, was wounded, probably by a shot or splinter. He tried to stand, blood soaking his armor. The emperor begged him to hold. But the Geno's captain, barely conscious, was carried to the rear and toward the harbor. Word spread along the wall: Giustiniani is gone. For the tired defenders at the critical sector, that single rumor was as heavy as a cannonball. The line wavered. At that moment, Mehmed threw in fresh Janissaries and directed artillery to smash the palisade. A banner rose in the breach. The defenders tried to countercharge. In the crush, Constantine XI threw off imperial insignia and fought as a common soldier, shouting, "The city is lost, but I live." Witnesses later claimed he fell near the gate of St. Romanos or in the melee at the *** Lycus Valley ***, his body never definitively identified. Elsewhere, postern gate known as Kirkeporta may have been left ajar or forced, accounts differ. Whether or not that small entry mattered, the psychology did. Multiple points of penetration at once broke coherence. Along the Blachany, Ottoman flags flickered. On the harbour walls, pressure spiked. The defenders were now fighting in pockets. Inside the city, bells clanged, civilians ran toward Hagia Sophia. Some rushed to the docks, some barricaded streets, many simply knelt and prayed. The last Byzantine counterattack failed to reseal the breach. The Janissaries poured through, disciplined and relentless, fanning out to secure towers and gates. By mid-morning on the 29th of May 1453, the Ottoman banner flew from the walls. Drums rolled. Mehmed II entered the city through a shattered gate that emperors had once rode past in triumph. The soldiers received the rite of sack, long customary after a stormed city, for a limited time. Hagia Sophia's doors were forced. Within hours, the great church was claimed as a mosque. A millennium of empire ended in a breath. When the noise faded, Constantinople was Ottoman. Mehmed II prayed in Hagia Sophia, then ordered protection for key quarters to repopulate the city. He declared himself Caesar I Rum, Caesar of Rome, the heir, in his mind, to the Roman imperial legacy. He made the city his capital, soon to be the heart of a Mediterranean superpower. The Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, ceased to exist. For scholars in the West, the fall felt like an apocalypse. Yet, as Greek scholars fled to Italy carrying manuscripts and languages, their knowledge accelerated the Renaissance. For military minds, the lesson was brutal and clear: gunpowder now ruled. Castles and cities must change, or fall. Europe's trade routes shifted, too. With the Ottomans controlling the land bridge between Asia and Europe, Western powers sought sea routes around Africa, and within decades Columbus sailed west. One breach in a wall pushed dominoes across oceans. What if Giustiniani had not been wounded, or had stayed at the breach? His presence had held the line for weeks. Could a few more hours have allowed a Western relief fleet to arrive? What if the Golden Horn chain had held unchallenged? No overland Ottoman ships, no floating batteries. The defenders might have concentrated on the land wall and prolonged the siege. What if Mehmed's bombards had failed or cracked under strain? Without artillery dominance, would the Theodosian Walls have bought another year, or another century? What if the city had surrendered on terms early on? Constantinople might have avoided sack, but would any future have remained Byzantine at all, or simply Ottoman under a different veneer? History chose its road. On the 29th of May 1453, medieval ended for the Eastern Mediterranean, and a new era began: Ottoman, gunpowder, global. What should we cover next? The Siege of Vienna, 1529–1683, when Europe faced the Ottomans at its gates. The Battle of Lepanto, 1571, oars, cannons, and the last great galley battle. Or the Reconquisters finale, 1492, the fall of Granada. Tell us in the comments which epic battle you want next, and why.